Hello and welcome back to 4th Age Guides. In this episode, we're looking at the unit roster for the Kingdom of Dorwinion in the 4th Age Total War Dominion of Men. Dorwinion is a minor faction in the mod. It does not get as large a unit roster or as large a variety, but what it does have has some very good themes in it. And one of the major themes of Dorwinion is well-armored infantry at the higher tiers especially. You'll see that there's not a lot of cavalry selection here, but what you do have is some excellent quality infantry. At the lower tier, that stuff is going to be fairly cheap and not super robust, but as you move through the ranks into the higher tiers, you will get some really solid stuff. So let's start off. We'll go from tier 1 all the way up to tier 4 in terms of military development and take a look at some of the units you can train as Dorwinion. First on your list, at tier 1, you will find Rovanian Spearmen and Rovanian Foresters. These are both very interesting units in their own ways. Spearmen have the Hedgehog ability, which I believe is unique in the mod. I don't think any other unit can use this particular formation. That is I think it was called Schildtrom in Vanilla Barbarian Invasion, where the units sort of blob up into this big circle with their spears and shields all facing outwards. It's very vulnerable to missiles, but it is really good against cavalry, and in my experience, it works surprisingly well. So even though these guys are a tier 1 unit, it is good to bring a couple of them into your fights, especially in your early fights, and use that formation when you expect that you're going to be facing cavalry. A more versatile unit, may be tricky to get a handle on initially, but well worth getting used to, is Rovanian Foresters. So these are a skirmisher unit, and ranged combat is really powerful in 4th Age, so it's nice to have a ranged unit at tier 1. These are kind of a priority for me when I'm in the early years of a campaign and I don't have a lot that I can train, and I don't have a ton of money necessarily, but I want something that's going to sort of be a force multiplier, and Rovanian Foresters can provide that for you. They have spears as a secondary weapon, so they're decent in melee. They have a shield as well. So once they throw all their javelins, you can get them to do some light flanking duties potentially. Certainly chase off enemy archers or light cavalry even. But they're a really good support unit all around, and it's good to have a couple or 4 units in an army. Once you get to tier 2, you will see some more variety pop up. Rovanian Axemen are going to be your first kind of respectable infantry unit, dedicated infantry. Of course, Rovanian Spearmen are really good, in certain roles, but these guys are going to have better stats, better defense, more aggressive, smaller unit size, but they are going to be good for what they are. So don't expect great things. You'll notice that when you go up against, say, the Axemen of Rune or North Rune, which are at the same tier, that those units do have better armor, they have more men per unit, and they can war cry, and so your Rovanian Axemen are going to feel like they're outmatched. And so you do have to use combined arms. You're not going to get a wall of Rovanian Axemen and win the day, but you do need to have a few around in those early armies to do flanking and to kind of help hold the line, because these Rovanian Spearmen are good for some roles, but not for others. Also at tier 2, you will have Rovanian Hunters. This is a very important unit for you, great for garrison duty. I think only 90 upkeep per turn, which is quite a steal for what you get. Their missile attack is certainly not the best, but in the early part of the game, they're going to be extremely capable. I like to have at least 4 in an army. And also at tier 2 military development in your homelands, Rovanian Scouts. This is an extremely important unit for Dorwinion. This is a very light cavalry unit. They do have a shield, and so their defense is not terrible, but they are much more important sort of as a light hit and run cycle charge kind of unit. So you want to have multiple of these. Don't just train 2 and call it a day because you're an infantry faction. No, you want to have like 4 in an army, or 6, or you can even go even crazier. There are tales of people who have trained 20 units full of Rovanian Scouts and just swept the map before them, because they are very powerful in a massed charge situation. So you do want to have several of them. I like to have them all together. When I was playing earlier, I would have a couple of units on one flank and a couple of units on the other, and try to do double envelopment. These days I do single envelopment. I put all of my cavalry on one wing typically, and then just overwhelm that one wing. and it just feels that much more effective. So these are very, very important units for the field battles that you're going to fight. Obviously, they're not going to be so effective in cities. At Tier 3, you're going to start to get some of your Dorwinion-specific stuff. All of these units are also trainable by your immediate neighbor, the Kingdom of Dorwinion. And so as such, you do have to be careful that they don't just outproduce you at your own types of units. Otherwise, it'll come down to numbers and personal tactics. But at Tier 3 and above, you'll start to get your better stuff. So Dorwinion Watch is a very strong spear unit. They've got reasonable morale, which is the first time we've seen morale mentioned in any of your units. They are very well armored indeed, and they get a bonus fighting riders. Now, you don't want to go too crazy training this higher tier stuff because it all has a fairly high upkeep. But a couple of units of these types of spearmen in your armies will go a long way and will not need to be retrained nearly as much as these lower tier, lesser armed guys. So Dorwinion Watch are very, very strong. Also at Tier 3, you will find Dorwinion Bowmen. These are something of an upgrade of your Rovanian Hunters. You'll notice that they have a bit higher, decently higher attack, a bit higher missile attack, much higher defense, and so they will also have a higher upkeep and smaller unit size. But these guys you might think of as something of a hybrid unit potentially. They're certainly not super well armored, but they can perform that role if their arrows are spent or if you need them to do some flanking very quickly. I tend to keep them back from the fight so they don't get lost to missile fire, and sort of run them around the flanks when I've cleared out the other archers with these guys who are much more replaceable. But these guys will last you a bit longer, so it's good to have one or maybe two units in an army. I tend, though, to go with cheaper numbers rather than with more expensive quality when it comes to archers like this. At Tier 4, you will get some very, very nice units. Dorwinion Men-at-Arms. This is somewhat similar. It's kind of like a Northman copy of the Men-at-Arms of the Reunited Kingdom, let's say. They're not as good, but they can perform a shield wall, which is very rare among non-Dunedainic factions. So that's going to make them very, very strong in the defense. And they're just a great front line unit to hold the line, to soak up missile fire, and to sort of control the flow of the battlefield. Again, you don't want to train a ton of these. Their upkeep is something like 500 a turn, but they are very strong for what they do. Great in city defenses or really any defense, but they can do just about anything. They've got a decent attack. They've got an excellent defense, good morale, strong unit. And the signature unit for Dorwinion, perhaps, is the Halberdiers. These are also available at your highest tier of development, and you're going to want to use them in a bit of a careful role. They lack shields, and so they're going to suffer a bit from missile fire. To that end, I tend to keep them a bit back from the battle line and move them to the flanks as needed, kind of in response to where the cavalry is going to go. You'll see that most times the AI cavalry is not going to obligingly charge right into your spears in the front line. They're probably going to try to outflank you, or they're going to go after your archers. So if you have these guys just back, ready to rush in and intercept enemy cavalry, they're going to be extremely effective there. Again, they've got great armor, so in melee you're not going to lose too many of them, but just keep them away from arrow fire. There's no need to take losses in that regard. Your general unit here, Dorwinion Nobles, this is a cavalry unit, and as such it's pretty rare and important for you to take care of them. Notice, though, that they have a sword instead of a spear, and so in that sense they're not going to have quite the punch in terms of charge as some of the other factional bodyguard units. But they are very strong in defense. They're very robust in melee, and so it is worth getting them into the fight when you can be sure that it's a fight that you're going to win. So obviously be careful about spearmen and the usual stuff, but them charging into archers, flanking, all that stuff is going to be quite effective. Now, this is your sort of native roster, but Dorwinion also benefits from being able to get some units that are nearby. There are a lot of units here that we haven't covered yet. So let's see, the Mountain Guards, Retainer Longbowmen, and Rovanian March Wardens. And I think that just about covers it. Oh, nope, the Retainer Swordsmen. So these 4 units are available to you when you conquer into certain areas of the map. And these areas for the map are really close to your homelands. So in some ways, Dorwinion is in an excellent position to expand just a little bit and then get all of these benefits of these very interesting unit types. So to start with the mountain guards, these are available in dwarven settlements. And there is one, if you remember the campaign video for this faction that I posted recently, there is a dwarven settlement immediately south of your capital, Nareg-Zigil. And if you go for it fairly early and tech it up, you can train mountain guards. These are an excellent, very solid unit. I very rarely see them in the campaign. Usually it takes a very long time to sort of tech up to them, but they are extremely powerful. They've got great defense, they've got great armor, as you might expect, and they also have a good attack. So they wield warhammers, which makes them effective against armor. Your only other armor-piercing unit is the halberdiers. And again, these are more of an anti-cav unit, so you might want to hold them back from fighting against heavy infantry. But these guys can do just about anything. So a fantastic unit for the front line in just about any role. In Dale's lands, which again are just north and slightly to the west of your starting position, you will find retainer longbowmen. These are similar in some ways, to your other archers, but they do have, let's see, a 7 attack, which is higher than your Rovanian hunters and almost as high as your Dorwinion bowmen, but in a larger unit size. And so when you're outside of your homelands, you'll find it less likely to find some of this high-tier stuff that you can train. And so Dale is a fantastic place to hold and train these retainer longbowmen, where you can send more arrows into the air to great effect. So definitely worth training them. They also have, I think, a longer range than your other native archers. So it's worth keeping that in mind and checking into them when you conquer a place like Dale, which is going to be very well developed and thus much easier for you to get to the highest tier of military barracks that you'll need to train these units. And in Rovanion itself, right to your west, Rovanian March Wardens. So I think the place you're looking for here will be Rovanos, which is Rovanian's capital. That's just literally 2 provinces away from your own capital. Definitely worth going here to get Rovanian March Wardens because they add some much-needed cavalry to your roster. These guys are kind of a medium cav unit, so they fit a nice role in between your very light but very fast and hard-hitting Rovanian scouts to your much heavier but slower and not so charge-oriented Dorwinian noble bodyguard units. So a great unit to have, again, just more of that versatility for Dorwinion. And a bit further afield, but not too far, in Gondor's homelands, you'll find retainer swordsmen. I think the closest place to get these is the settlement of Lathron, which is right north of the Argonath, so just on the other side of the Anduin, not too far from your starting position either, but certainly down in a place like Minas Anor, you'll be able to train retainer swordsmen. So another unit with shield wall, kind of an upgrade in some ways to your Dorwinian men-at-arms, with a better attack but similar defense and charge, also do shield wall, and so this is just a fantastic roster for you to benefit from. Again, the focus for Dorwinion is mostly on that infantry, but you will be able to use cavalry to great advantage, and so that's what I kind of want to show in the sort of custom battle that I have played out for you today. This is going up against the Kingdom of Dale, who, as I mentioned in the campaign video, is liable to be the most threatening faction for the early game. They may not attack you immediately, but that just means you need to be that much more careful because they're only building up to get stronger to attack you a bit later. So we're setting up here on a hill. We've got the typical kind of thing of infantry line in front, archers, and then I'm going to be setting up my cav and everything so on. We'll slow this down once everybody gets set up and the battle begins, so we can take a bit closer look at what we have. So on one flank here, I've got a couple of units of my Rovanian foresters. I only brought 2 into this fight. I like to keep them kind of close together. If I'd gone with more, I probably would have put the other 2 on the other end. But I tend to leave these guys on skirmish and working kind of in tandem, and they can kind of do their own thing. On the far extreme end, we've got the Dorwinian men-at-arms at the sort of extreme end of my infantry line, in shield wall formation, and so they're going to hold here nicely. In the middle, I've got my weakest units. I brought a couple of the Rovanian axemen here. These guys are actually hiding because this grass is considered tall grass, apparently. So that's going to be a nice surprise for the enemy. But again, not too many of these guys in the battle. Some of them, I wanted to include them here just to show how they performed because you are likely to use them in your early battles. In the center, I've got Dorwinion Watch, very strong spear unit. Again, you might think of them as mostly anti-cav. I possibly should have put them over onto the flanks, but I thought these guys would be better in that position because these units, the Dorwinion Watch, are strong against just about anything. So no matter what's coming, whether it's cavalry or infantry, they can hold out decently against it. And on the far right wing, I've got my 2 units of Ravanian Spearmen. I don't think I used the Hedgehog formation in this battle, but they're just here to kind of hold the end of the line in case some cavalry tries to sweep around. Now I can see that the enemy approaching, we've got obviously a great height advantage here, and they're moving some cavalry off into the trees. I know they have a couple of riders, or 1 unit of Riders of Dale, a couple of units of Dale Mounted Watch, so they're going to focus on outflanking me over on the left. And so seeing that, what I'm going to do in a second here is move my halberdiers over there, which I've kept in the back line, again because I don't want them to come under missile fire, and I want to dictate when I'm going to send them into the fight. I don't want them to be attacked by some of Dale's heavier infantry units. So we're going to basically have these guys attack the enemy cavalry. Everything else is going to sit tight. In the center, I'm going to keep my Dorwinion nobles, and on the far right wing, my 4 units of Ravanian scouts all grouped up together. Now notice the AI does this very frequently. They go after your archers, and so I almost managed to pull them out of there in time, but not quite. I'm going to send those halberdiers against the unit of Dale Mounted Watch and let these Riders of Dale just run into my axemen. Now this is not the best matchup, of course. My axemen are going to kind of flounder against these guys, but the Riders of Dale did not pull off a good charge, so they're quickly overwhelmed, and I can move my own bodyguard unit in to push them down the field. But I do have to be careful to bring my bodyguard back up so that we don't get caught by these very strong black spears, for example. We're seeing the melee breakout now, and this is the point where I'm starting to bring my Ravanian scouts around to the right, as we're doing fairly well at sending away these infantry units. I'm charging them right into some Dale Hearthmen, I believe, with the hopes of breaking them instantly. That doesn't quite work. Actually, it works better than I thought. Those longbowmen, maybe that was their target. But I'm going to have to pull them out and try some repeated charges because Dale has some very strong units here. Okay, the general got caught by my bodyguard and the halberdiers there, so made short work of him. But here I'm pulling out the Ravanian scouts. I'm sort of drawing them back so we can do another charge. These Hearthmen of Dale are easily going to chew through my Ravanian spearmen if I let them. So it's important that I get good charges. So notice how I wait until they've basically stopped moving, and then I pull them all to sort of charge together. They've got their spears down. That's going to be a good charge. And that's pretty much going to break them. Again, Dale still has some very strong units in the field. We've got several units of black spears, which have quite good morale. Those Hearthmen, though, have broken. And now we can see some of the other units starting to rout in response to their elites who are leaving the field. It's important to bring back your units. I sent my halberdiers out to chase some riders, but you do want to keep them in the fight, so I've moved them up to support my men-at-arms. We're taking on these Hearthmen, but again, these Hearthmen are going to be a pretty stubborn foe, so it's going to take a bit more before we get rid of them entirely. We've got most of the army, though, on the run. At this point, it's mostly a matter of watching the rest of the units rout and decide or realize that it's actually all over for them. So we'll just sort of speed up the action here. Pretty much everyone's routing except these units who are fighting to the death, and here we go. So we took a little under 300 losses. Again, we're set up on a very nice hill. That's the kind of situation that you want to see on the campaign map. Honestly, you don't typically want to fight an army like that with Dorwinion. You don't want to fight Dale when they've got that many elite troops, so you want to obviously try to seek better engagements than that one. But if you are set up on a decent sort of stretch of terrain, you can do quite well. So we can see we did decently here. Lost a lot of our Ravanian axemen in that initial fight against the riders and against the other infantry units that they had to fight later on. Lost some casualties among the Ravanian spearmen, but notice not quite as many as you would have expected. This is a tier 1 unit, and they were fighting Hearthmen at some point. So the fact that they did that well is pretty impressive. Ravanian foresters lost a lot. I think they got caught by some cavalry, and possibly they also got shot down a bit, but did very well. The Ravanian hunters got over 100 losses on average. Let's see, the scouts did fairly well also, pushing those heavy infantry and archers into routes, and by keeping them sort of on the flanks there, we help them do the job. So I hope that has been helpful to you. Dorwinion is a really fun faction to play, very challenging in the early game, but the battles, if you start to pull some of your units together, you're going to have to rely not only on your elites, but on those lower tier guys, those Ravanian scouts, the light cav, the light archers, the skirmishers, even your tier 1 spearmen have a role. So it's interesting to sort of get that all to synergize together. So I hope that has been helpful, and I hope you'll join me in the next video. Until then, take care, everybody.